improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Carry On Podcast SITREP edition. I am your host, Brad Colbert, the Iceman, for the week of March 15th. It has been an extremely busy week. There's been a lot of news coverage on a whole suite of things. Trying to find an angle to bring to you has been a challenge, but one that I've been prepared for. Before we dive into the events, and oh my God, are there a lot of them, let's do a couple of thank yous. We have had a tremendous outpouring of support from a lot of subscribers, and I want to say from me to you directly, thank you. Thank you very much. It is your support that makes this show possible. We are a team. We would probably do this with nothing in the world but a tent and a microphone, but we appreciate you. Philip, Ragnar, Michael, Levi, JJFS, Mike, Sarah, Keku, Daniel, Ron, Paladin Potato, Calvin, and Bennett and Adam from Oregon. A special thank you. All right. If you are interested in becoming a subscriber, I welcome you to stop by the page and check out our tiers. Our content is open for most and exclusive for some. We also offer early access to a lot of shows, and we do have a lot of exciting things coming up. We are working on getting a whole lot more of the original Generation Kill platoon to sit down with me in a one-on-one format similar to what you've seen before. We also have a top-notch survival guide that was inspired mostly from our good friends over at our stakeholder prepping. But this has been something that I have curated and shepherded for years and updated, and it is all new, it's all fresh, and that'll be coming to you very, very soon. We also have some amazing authors and professors that we have stopped by and chatted with, and all of those are on the horizon and will be dropping here shortly. So stay tuned, and we hope that you have enjoyed what you have listened to so far. I also want to give a very special thank you to YouTuber React Like Barry, who is not only gracious enough to mention the show, but is reacting in real time to Generation Kill episodes. So stop by his channel and learn a deep dive on topics such as his recent episode on maritime law and the sinking of the Iranian vessel by a U.S. submarine. Lots of new content on his show that I have found very interesting, and I think that based off of the listeners that we have, you'll probably find it interesting too. So for those new subscribers looking for content, don't worry, we have got plenty in the works. I also wanted to take a moment and recognize some of the U.S. forces that were recently killed in this current operation in Iran, just so their names are said and I pay respects. I looked at their bios and their military affiliation, some of the awards and decorations that they've had, whether or not they were married, whether or not they had families, children, and I took that to heart, and I'm not going to go through the bios and the memoriams for each and every one of them, but killed in the March 1st unmanned aircraft attack in Kuwait. All of the following individuals were assigned to the 103rd Sustainment Command. Captain Cody Korg, Sergeant First Class Noah Tjens, Sergeant First Class Nicole Amour, Sergeant Declan Cody, Major Jeffrey O'Brien, and then Chief Warrant Officer the 3rd Robert M. Marzan. Looking at their bios, almost every single one of them had children. A lot of them were close to retirement, especially the Chief Warrant Officer, almost 30-year career in the Army, and he was months away from retirement. And I can't imagine what the families of these individuals are feeling. My heart goes out to all of them. And those are the ones that were lost in Kuwait. Recently, we had the March 12th KC-135 refueler crash in Western Iraq, also supporting operations. Now, officials say that the crash was not due to hostile fire or friendly fire. The cause remains under investigation. I know that the Iranian militia in Iraq claimed responsibility, but there's nothing that indicates that that's accurate one way or another. KC-135s in charge of refueling. They are absolutely instrumental for all combat operations that we do in that theater. Major John Cleaner, Captain Ariana Savino, Tech Sergeant Ashley Pruitt, Captain Seth Cavall, Captain Curtis Anks, and Tech Sergeant Tyler Simmons. I don't know what to say. It's impossible to conduct combat operations without fatalities, but it doesn't mean that we don't. It doesn't mean that we don't lament the loss. I would imagine that there's going to be more. I wish that that wasn't the case, but the U.S. military hasn't gone clean in a conflict. I mean, Venezuela, somebody got wounded, and that really wasn't a conflict, not nearly as span as globally reaching as the one that we're currently experiencing in Iraq. So with that said, and a moment of silence for them, obviously, let's dive into the once around the world. Oh, by the way, beverage for tonight, I do have a bit of a cold. I am drinking tea with a little bit of lemon, some honey, and some bourbon. I have to have a little bit. Can't go completely clean. All right. March 14th. This is, yesterday. So this is the information that is current that I can assess as of this moment now. So basically, globally, U.S. military is sustaining a continued global posture, and I think they're doing it quite well. The decisive theater, as I'm sure you've guessed right now, is CENTCOM. Everything else, Korea, the South China Sea, NATO's Arctic line, Somalia, the southern border, Arctic homeland defense, it's all being managed under the shadow of that fight, the Iranian conflict. CENTCOMMAND, CENTCOM, their own release is making clear that Operation Epic Fury is the present center of gravity, which, yeah, no shit. The command says that U.S. and partner forces began strikes to dismantle the Iranian regime's security apparatus. But, I mean, even up until this moment, we're going to get into this here in a minute in a separate segment centered specifically on Iran, I'm still a little fuzzy about what the goals are of Epic Fury. What is the end state? What does success look like? So we are going to take a deep dive into that here towards the end of the show. However, at least according to CENTCOM, it's to dismantle the Iranians regime's security apparatus. They are hitting command and control nodes, air defense systems, missiles, drone launch sites, as well as military airfields. There's not a lot of military targets left to strike, to be perfectly honest. The only thing that comes next is continued attrition of their forces. But as far as their military industrial complex is concerned, there's not a whole lot left to strike. CENTCOM updates also reported U.S. casualties. As I mentioned earlier, the 6 members killed in action March 2nd, additional fatalities tied to the KC-135 refueler. I don't want to make light of it, but I'm actually surprised that there has not been more. We have interdicted a tremendous amount of Iran's incomings. We're absorbing them at the cyclic rate that has a shelf life, but there's a lot of other targets out there, and I'm just a little surprised. This is an operational campaign. It has real attrition. Once the tankers, the ISR, the air defense, strike aircraft, force protection units, and maritime escorts are committed here, other theaters don't get to pretend that those assets are still freely available. Right now, CENTCOM is eating readiness, lift, and attention in real time. And that's taking a lot away from other theaters. Moving over to Indo-PACOM in Korea right now, Freedom Shield 26, that's military cooperation with the United States and the ROK. It's been underway since March 9th to the 19th with U.S. and ROK air and space components explicitly tied into the exercise. Oh, and of course, our good friends North Korea, as they do every time we do this exercise, responded by firing about 10 ballistic missiles towards the Eastern Sea. That's according to the Associated Press and South Korean military reporting. Cobra Gold 2026, I've done a few of those. It's concluded with about 8,000 troops from 30 nations. And Sea Dragon 2026, which brought together the United States, Australia, India, Japan, and New Zealand for anti-submarine warfare training, which is pretty cool. You don't really hear a lot about New Zealand, but they are a huge partner. U.S., Japan, and Philippines multilateral maritime activity in the South China Sea also continued in late February. Right now, Indo-PACOM is being held together less by raw unilateral overmatch and more by coalition. The administration knows it can't carry every front alone while CENTCOM is doing what it's doing. And so if China is really studying this honestly, it sees a U.S. military that remains dangerous, but increasingly dependent on alliance responsiveness. And that's tough when the administration has pretty much given the middle finger to a lot of our allies. So the only ones that are sticking with us are the ones that have dependence. And don't get me wrong, the European theater, Europe, it definitely needs the United States for a lot of escalation ladder support, but not like some of the smaller countries like the Philippines and South Korea need us. So yeah, in addition to alliances, there's a lot of distributed basing. There's a lot of partner capacity. All of those we continue to support, but we're relying on them a lot more than we would, say, a year ago. All right. Let's move over to the European Command, also NATO as a whole. Right now, like many theaters, Europe is not the main effort, but it is a critical support layer. Reuters is reporting that NATO's cold response exercise that went along with Arctic Sentry, it's running March 9th to March 19th, a total of about 25,000 troops, 14 different countries, and there's 4,000 U.S. personnel, which is, I like. Notable emphasis on civilian total defense readiness. I'm pretty sure that Greenland is well aware of their personal defense readiness plans. Reuters also notes that there were planned U.S. F-35s that were supposed to be part of the exercise, but were withdrawn. No one is saying why. Many people think it is related to the Middle East, but I can't find any public sourcing information on that specifically. Separately, Reuters is reporting that Romania approved U.S. use of local air bases for defensive refueling and monitoring connected to Iran, operations in Iran. Europe Command's current public emphasis is also on Cyber Unity 2026, cyber partnerships with Poland and NATO. Right now, Europe is basically serving three functions at once: deterrence against Russia, strategic depth for CENTCOM spillover, and a laboratory for integrated ally readiness from Arctic logistics to cyber defense. They're doing a lot. We're asking them to do a lot, but the risk is that Europe mistakes this improved rhetoric that we have with the administration and this higher exercise tempo for actual magazine depth, air defense density, and mobilization capacity. So NATO's much more serious now than they've ever been, but that's not the same as ready for a prolonged multi-theater stress. My concern is that they don't have enough defense and depth to surge against Russia if they decide to probe. That is my concern, and of course that's an opinion. Let's head down to AFRICOM. Continuing to strike Somalia against ISIS Somalia as well as Al-Shabaab. They releases, no, I'm trying to think of the news source that dropped this information. I can't remember. Irrelevant. Releases this month cite airstrikes against ISIS Somalia on March 8th and a broader strike activity across late February. We talked about that in previous episodes, plus an Al-Shabaab strike on March 11th. Africa remains this tax that the U.S. just simply can't stop paying. They're not massive campaigns, but they show the U.S. still believes distraction creates opportunity for jihadist actors. So even while the Middle East is on fire, AFRICOM remains active enough to prevent this vacuum formation. This tax is due in Somalia, whether we like it or not. I just don't know how long we can continue to pay it, if the metaphor stretches. All right. Let's go to the homeland. It's ridiculous, as always. Northcom activity shows a sharper homeland defense posture than a lot of people realize. Arctic Edge 2026, that went from February 23rd to March 13th, so just recently wrapped up across Alaska and Greenland. That was a NORAD U.S. Northcom-led field training exercise. So a lot of emphasis on readiness, allied interoperability, cruise missile defense, which is NORAD stock and trade. For those of you that may be a little bit older in the audience, you remember the wonderful Matthew Broderick movie War Game, where they still had private tours inside of NORAD's operational center in Cheyenne Mountain. Yeah, they don't do that anymore. Not since 9/11 anyways, but a fantastic structure, a lot of interesting history if you look at where NORAD is based out of and what they had to do to carve out Cheyenne Mountain for their headquarters. At the same time, Joint Task Force Southern Border marks its 1-year anniversary on March 14th. Congratulations. This is underscoring that the Pentagon remains very deeply involved in border support operations. I will tell you that the military intelligence that the military intelligence that is going to support the southern border, it's huge. There's a lot of resources from the military that are being used to support border integrity between Mexico and the United States. Northcom is also highlighting the standard interagency efforts on cartel operations along the U.S.-Mexico border. There's a lot. There's a lot of drugs that get smuggled across, and that's great. I mean, it's not great, but okay, that's not really the gap that a lot of the intelligence is using to seal up. It's more coordinated attacks from other countries that are using the Mexico-American border to come into the United States to conduct attacks. So a lot of the intelligence is focused on that. If you look at the Pentagon's 2026 budget, that is the bluntest admission that you can find if you're really clever that says where things are going, not just fiscally, but how our conflict in Iran is going and sort of the long-term projections of what the United States anticipates needs to be. And so you follow the money, right? We're talking about nearly 200,000 long-range weapons, a couple billions of dollars to replace ordnance. And a lot of the companies that are making these weapons for us domestically, obviously, they are at or near maximum capacity. So we are acting like we're on a wartime footing, but our industrial base isn't. I mean, we'd have to go back to World War II, Korea, Vietnam to really see the factories that make a lot of this stuff operating at peak capacity like they are now. And when you look at the volume of precision ordnance that we produce, the technological advancements in ordnance across the spectrum, these are not just 500-pound bombs that are being dropped. These are all precision munitions. The amount of critical components that go into a long-range weapon, it's astonishing, and they're expensive, and we're really burning through a lot. The budget overview also frames a procurement and munition expansion. So it's not only do we want the factories that are making things today to turn up to 11, we are also looking to expand new production wherever we can find it. And this is really a strategic priority. This whole military industrial complex, I love the term, by the way, it's a hidden war because the U.S. can still run multiple theaters like we're doing now, but only if it can replace what it is shooting, escorting, refueling, and wearing out. And that's going to take money. Right now, the budget language itself says the ceiling is visible. I think that in the past, we didn't think there was a maximum manufacturing capacity, but now we're starting to see it. This means that if the Iran campaign goes long, or if there's a simultaneous Korean crisis or Taiwan contingency, it becomes not just a challenge, but a replenishment and manufacturing problem. And I think that's going to be the limiting factor. The United States, make no mistakes, is still the only military on earth that can fight in one theater, deter in two more, and maintain homeland and counterterror missions at the same time. But it comes at a price. The current posture reveals the price of that role. It's, I guess, managed overextension. It's not collapse. And God knows that Trump's not retreating from a fight. And it's not impotence. It's really managed overextension. The real strategic story is not, can the U.S. act globally? It can. The real question is, how long can it sustain this tempo before one shitty little opportunistic adversary tests the seams? Like, North Korea is already poking. You can guarantee China is watching. Russia is measuring Arctic and European readiness in real time. Iran's forcing the tempo, and the seams are not imaginary. They're just not yet torn open. I think the hard truth is the U.S. military is still very much globally dominant, but dominance is no longer the same thing as abundance. We've been giving a lot to Ukraine. We have been giving a lot to a lot of people, and the armed forces are proving they can fight and posture everywhere at once, but they're also proving the era of effortless surplus is over. So the next crisis that we have is not just going to test whether America is strong. It's going to test whether America can choose, prioritize, and produce fast enough. And I don't know if we can. So just a couple of notes before we end the once around the world. Understand that CENTCOM, the developments over there can change in real time. So within hours. So NORTHCOM and combatant command pages, a lot of the stuff where I pull this information from, they surface information through media galleries and video pages rather than a clean written press release. So a lot of the information that I get for this comes from Reuters and the Associated Press most heavily when I can't find it from military press releases. Okay. So let's change gears here for a minute. And we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, a Marine Expeditionary Unit. If you're not familiar, the United States has, at any given time, 2, sometimes 3 Marine Expeditionary Units out sailing the nation's oceans. The nation's oceans? Sorry, the world's oceans. We also have 2 carrier groups, sometimes 3, that are also out there. Now, they do leave together, but they don't stay together. Oftentimes, they're deployed from the same naval base. The ships tend to home port in those bases. Excuse me. But you don't want to cluster them all together. So what is a Marine Expeditionary Unit? It's roughly 2,200 to 2,500 Marines and sailors on 3 different ships. And it is an entire infantry battalion. You also have enablers. There's armored vehicles. There's artillery. Once upon a time, there were tanks. Marine Corps got rid of tanks. There's a couple of other things. And all of these are to provide the United States a force in readiness, a 911 force. If there's a problem somewhere in the world, you can have a coordinated air and ground and support integrated force ready to go. So if there's an embassy that needs evacuation, if there's humanitarian aid that needs to be given, if there's, I don't know, an oil platform that gets taken over, or there's a whole host of missions, and we're going to go through them. That's what a Marine Expeditionary Unit can do. Now, the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, and let's just say MU, so that I don't have to roll that off my tongue every time, is based out of Okinawa, or at least the Marines are. The ships come from mainland Japan. They come down to Okinawa. The Marines load up, and everybody leaves. And I've done a few of these out of the 31st. I've done a few out of California as well. So West Coast MEUs, 5 in total. So I'm pretty familiar with the makeup of this. Now, this particular MEU is based out of the USS Tripoli, which is an LHA-7. Looks like a mini aircraft carrier. It has the Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35s, has some CH-53s, has some Ospreys, Cobras, and a couple of other things, some Hueys. They are able to provide the sea lift, the Navy ships, and the Marines provide all of the aviation components and the amphibious components. So they are currently moving towards the Middle East as the Iran war and the Strait of Hormuz crisis intensify. Multiple current reports say the move was approved in response to escalating Iranian attacks that will end the disruption of shipping through the Straits of Hormuz. At the same time, official Navy imagery shows that this amphibious readiness group, this ARG, the ARG is the ships, the MEU or the Marines, they're one and the same, okay, including the USS Tripoli, the USS New Orleans, and the USS San Diego, operating in the 7th Fleet's AO just days before the redirection. So this is a real-time diversion of an already assembled and certified force. What matters here is really not the raw troop number, it's the type. As I say, a MEU, it's not a blunt occupation force. This is a light strike package. It's a sea-based crisis response package. It is made for amphibious operations, limited contingency, embassy reinforcement, NEO, non-combatant evacuation. I think that's the most likely scenario that they're going to be used for, but they do raids and they can hold ground to enable follow-on forces. I mean, we did it in Afghanistan in 2001, going into Camp Rhino. We did it from the MEU. The deployment is unfolding inside a big operational problem. Iran has disrupted or closed the shipping through the Straits of Hormuz. Reuters is reporting traffic through the strait has plunged dramatically. The U.S. is considering convoy escorts. I think that's stupid. I don't think that providing or offering escort support is not dumb. I'm just saying it's unrealistic. You can't do it. We don't have enough Navy ships. Even if we asked, we have, I'm not going to talk about it in tonight's broadcast, but if you've been watching the news, the United States has asked for other countries to please help provide naval escorts, and we've gotten crickets back in response. I'm frankly not surprised. You're talking about 120 to 150 ships passing the Strait of Hormuz every day. As I've said in a previous broadcast, we just don't have enough ships. But let's leave that alone for the moment, right? CENTCOM has publicly warned the Iranian forces are using civilian ports along the Strait of Hormuz for military operations. And this is a great way to use your Marine Expeditionary Unit. It's a major tell that the United States is now framing the littoral battle space, these ports, these islands, some of the launch sites, the missile and drone nodes, as an active combat zone. And that means that the 31st MEU is being set because Washington wants options at this strategic seam between sea and land, right? So carriers and bombers, whether they're, from the United States CONUS, whether they're from the carrier groups themselves, they can strike. And these destroyers and frigates can escort and intercept. But a MEU gives commanders something different. Now you have the ability to do VBSSs. You can seize and secure ports. You can evacuate U.S. bases. You can do raids, reinforce, and then leave. And that's, I think, what the real meaning of this move is. What I think the most plausible scenario for the MEU is non-combatant evacuation or embassy reinforcement. We have a tremendous amount of embassies in that part of the world. Many of them, as again, if you've been watching the news and you saw Baghdad get hit, they're in range of Iranian weapons, and evacuating embassies or bases is absolutely what a Marine Expeditionary Unit is built for, as well as embassy reinforcement. So that's the cleanest and the most doctrinal use. If U.S. civilians in Iraq, the Gulf, or anywhere else become vulnerable, the MU, 13th MU, 31st, 15th, 17th, a MU is what you want. It has a ton of airlift. You have a lot of infantry. You have a lot of medical. And there's a boatload of logistics. Haha, no pun intended. It's literally on a boat. All launched from sea. You don't need a host country's politics. You don't need permission to come in. You're not flying the 82nd Airborne somewhere. So, sorry, I warned you that I was a little under the weather today. This is what we're trained for. The other thing that it's possible that you could use this for, unlikely but possible, would be maritime security and ship escort support. You could do it. It's not the primary mine clearing force, but it can support a campaign to reopen the Hormuz by providing some aviation assets, air defense support, VBSS seizure teams, small boat security. And then you can do just overwatch and quick reaction forces, all tied to these combat operations. So you've got a force recon platoon. You probably have a reconnaissance platoon. There was a time when you had a SEAL platoon, but you don't. So you do have some very specialized raid capability. You have surface and aviation. You could do a VBSS if you needed to. Now, if it was anything with any critical signature, it's not going to be a MU. You're going to call in a tiered force from somewhere else to do it. But the point is that you could provide a lot in support of Hormuz if you wanted to. Reuters specifically notes escort operations are feasible but hard. They would require a sustained resource against all of the missiles, the drones, the mines, the fast attack boats, of which there are almost said a boatload again. There's a lot in the Straits. And then there are mini subs or unmanned underwater drones that are also a threat. But the MU gives a central command a flexible response layer around all of those naval operations. So the other thing that they can do is the seizure or temporary neutralization of a lot of this key maritime terrain. This, unfortunately, is what a lot of people jump to first. Most of them are too loose with it. Could a MU seize an island or a port node or a coastal launch complex? Yeah, it's possible, but that is not what I feel that a Marine Expeditionary Unit is best suited for. And it is within the design envelope, but there's already public reporting that the deployment is giving Washington an option tied to the Carg Island. That reporting also stresses the risks and defensive involved. Any kind of a raid or temporary seizure is more plausible than any sustained lodgement or penetration deep into Iran. I just don't see it. The other thing they could do is a limited raid or strike against a lot of these coastal threats that Iran is bringing to bear. So if the U.S. decides that it wants to reduce the missile, drone, mine threat before it escorts begin, the Marines could do it. They could be used for a very short duration raid, terminal guidance support, so guys on the ground identifying a target for aircraft to bomb or naval guns. They can also do battle damage confirmation. The reconnaissance teams are absolutely built for that. Boarding operations to an extent, we've talked about it. You could also secure specific sites after a strike. So that's a classic limited contingency operations territory. And then really, a lot of this is deterrence by presence. So sometimes the weapon is the option itself. A MU offshore gives a pretty strong signal to Tehran and actually every Gulf capital that the United States now has a visible force that can scale up or down depending on what the threat is. So we can go from humanitarian cover to hard combat pretty fucking quickly. I think it also reassures a lot of our partners without immediately committing the United States to a full invasion footprint. They feel better when they know, okay, the Marines are offshore. it just gives people a warm fuzzy. No better friend, no worse enemy, as the great General Mattis once said. You could do a lot of humanitarian and or consequence management missions as well. I think that's the least politically salient right now, but it is still real. If you have a mass casualty event, if you have refugees, displaced civilians, if one of our partners in the Gulf has a infrastructure damage, a MEU has CBs. It has a lot of other things that involves combat engineers, and it can shift into relief support, where there's a lot of medical assistance that is able to be levied, a lot of logistics. So that's part of why amphibious forces remain very, very useful. That's why we have a Marine Expeditionary Unit, multiple at any one time. What I do not see ever happening, that's an absolute, let me retract that. What I think is much less likely is a full-scale amphib invasion of Iran. You're not going to do that with 2,500 Marines. That's ridiculous. It's too small. They're too exposed. And unless you are intending on flowing in follow-on forces, they're going to get attrited pretty quick. Reuters' description of the Hormuz Strait alone, narrow lanes, lots of mountainous cover, mines, fast attack drones, missile threats, all of that explains why. MEU can punch pretty hard. It can extract, it can hold briefly, and it can shape, but it can't conquer and pacify Iran. And if you think otherwise, you're ill-informed. It just implies the U.S. believes the crisis is entering a phase where maybe air and naval gunfire alone is not going to be enough. And this adds a vertical intersection on the littorals, embassy rescue, short duration ground action if needed. It also signals that the Pentagon wants a graduated escalation ladder. I don't disagree with this one. MEU gives more options than a do nothing or launch a major ground war. That middle ground matters, and it's what the MEU is doing there. It's a lot of coercive leverage. It also, I think, implies that Washington, it's willing to pull some forces and risk from Indo-Pacific and put it into CENTCOM. The 31st MEU is really the only continuously forward deployed MEU in Japan. So when you redirect it, it's not trivial. It means that the fight that's taking place in the Middle East is consuming a lot of forces intended for Pacific crisis response. I'll tell you that the 31st MEU's biggest theater is Korea. And that is what they are pretty much there for the most part, right? There's other things that they can do, but it all centers in the Pacific. It is not in the Middle East. There's other MEUs for that. So the second order implications for deterrence elsewhere, especially in East Asia, are pretty high. I think also it implies the U.S. is preparing for a very messy littoral fight, not just more bombing. Central Command has given a lot of warning about Iranian use of civilian ports, and they are very concerned over dual use infrastructure and what the legal military groundwork for strikes or seizures in these port island coastal belts. Politically, this signals to quite a few audiences at once. If you're Iran, we're basically telling them that your coast, your ports, and your maritime chokeholds are no longer a sanctuary. There's a lot of things that we can do with air power. There's a lot of things that we can't. What it says to our friends in the Gulf and our allies is that the U.S. is not just going to bomb. It's building a force posture for crisis management, rescue, limited entry. And most importantly, especially right now, Washington knows that the Hormuz is a strategic economic emergency. It is a dumpster fire. Reuters notes roughly a fifth of global oil and liquefied natural gas normally transits through the straits. And the conflict has already slashed traffic, driven economic anxiety. Iran wants it to go to $200 a barrel. I think it's going to get there. I really do. So bottom line, 31st MEU deployment does not mean a United States invasion of Iran is imminent. It means something much more precise and in some ways more dangerous. The U.S. wants the ability to conduct fast, limited, politically deniable, or politically containable operations in the maritime littoral battle space. The ability to do embassy rescues, evacuations, maybe targeted raids, temporary seizure of key terrains, but a lot of coercive pressure. And this is the kind of force you send when you are preparing for escalation without yet committing to occupation. A couple of key caveats, things that I would like you to know. The reporting on the destination of the 31st MEU and its purpose is still, for the most part, based on unnamed officials. No one has come out publicly and declared that this is, at least from what I have been able to find, that this is where they're based, this is what they're doing, this is the destination. I don't know which option the White House is going to choose for the 31st MEU, so we'll wait. And then also, any scenario involving Carg Island or coastal seizures remains a complete guess on my part until it is officially confirmed. Current reporting, Russia appears to be giving Iran some actionable support. So a couple of days ago, it's all kind of running together. I mean, I constantly screen for news, filter through press reports, look at Department of War press releases, and I can't remember the exact day that I read, but the hypersonic missiles that Iran reportedly has, what I have been able to find is that the hypersonic missile was revealed in 2023. It was a work in progress. It has not yet been fielded. That's what I was able to find. And one of the things that goes along with the use of a hypersonic missile is you need almost real-time instantaneous intelligence to locate a target. So a U.S. aircraft carrier can cruise about 25 knots or more. That's pretty fast. It's pretty fast for something that holds 5,000 people aboard and 75, 80 aircraft. That's pretty quick. So it's constantly changing course, changing speed, and that's very difficult for a hypersonic missile to engage. You've got to know where your target is. Iran does not have a robust satellite infrastructure up there. They don't have a lot of intelligence assets left, but even before we launched 1,000+ strike packages on them, they didn't have some of this technology. So they got to be getting it from somebody. And a lot of people are reporting Russia. Not only are they providing Iran with intelligence, but in some cases, some of the enablers. So Russia denies it. Yeah, go figure. But a lot of the intelligence data is being provided to Iran from Russia. Otherwise, they would not have the locations of some of the things that they have decided to launch attacks on. A lot of the U.S. assets in the region wouldn't be known to them without it. And so this is pretty serious. But no, it's not described as a full proxy war. I kind of danced around the definition there, and I was alive in the Cold War. I was in high school when the wall came down. So I remember what the Cold War looks like, and it's real easy to revert back to that paradigm, but this is not it. So Moscow is helping Tehran raise the costs for Washington without openly entering the fight itself. Is that a proxy war? No, I think it's nuanced. I really do. And I think the distinction matters. I think a real proxy war usually means that the sponsor is underwriting the client's war effort at scale. Money, logistics, weapons flows, command support, sanctuary in some cases, as well as political cover. So because the client, Iran, is fighting primarily as the sponsor's instrument, that would be by definition, a proxy fight. That is not what the evidence shows here. Iran is not fighting on behalf of Russia. Iran is fighting on behalf of its own regime survival. A little bit of regional posture, but Russia appears to be exploiting this conflict to bleed the U.S. attention. It also complicates our operations and it lifts oil prices. So really, that's not loyalty to Iran. That is leverage against us. Russia has been credibly reported by major U.S. outlets and wire services to have provided Iran with information that could help target our warships, our aircraft, and a lot of the stuff in the region. Now, the administration is downplaying the effect, and I know why, because it's politically embarrassing to come out and say that Russia is actively supplying Iran with intelligence, and in the other hand, say that we are going to have a limited lift of oil sanctions against Russia. The U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff said Moscow denied doing it in a Trump-Putin call, which is ridiculous because Trump is such a sycophant when it comes to Putin. I mean, again, I did grow up in the Cold War. I remember doing duck and cover drills for a nuke strike, as ridiculous as that may sound. I came of age in a culture where it was East versus West, right? Anyone who was in a movie theater and watched Rocky fight Ivan, it didn't get more American than that, right? So that was the culture that I came of age in. Now, I'd like to think that I'm a free thinker and that I've evolved and that I can see the differences in the world as it is now and not maybe in an artificial construct of my youth, but Russia is still a bad actor. I can't paint it any other way. And to capitulate to anything that they say it's just mental masturbation. The White House gets on these phone calls with Putin and they walk away and go to the press room and say, oh, it was the best call in the world. He assured me that he's not doing anything. I mean, does anybody remember World War II? The same thing? Does anybody remember the British Prime Minister going to Hitler and coming away with a reassurance that Hitler wasn't going to invade? And then he fucking invaded. So anyways, Moscow denied doing it. Good for you, dude. The cleanest assessment that I can say about all of this is that I think the allegation is credible enough to take seriously, but at the official levels, at the White House level, at the Department of War level, it is still contested. Okay, cool. Of course, Kremlin has said Iran did not request Russian arms supplies, but that's not what we accused you of. So that's not the answer that I'm looking for. Reuters has reported that both Russia and China have kept their distance from direct military intervention, but they're benefiting from the crisis. And this tells you the real structure of this relationship between Russia and Iran. Russia wants Iran useful, but not rescued. And that really matches the broader strategic picture from the U.S. National Defense Strategy, which explicitly treats simultaneous or opportunistic action by multiple adversaries as a live problem. It frames the Middle East around deterring Iran while shifting more burden to regional partners. It was a matriculation of the national security strategy, this national defense strategy. So in other words, Washington already sees these theaters as increasingly linked. The honest judgment, if you look at it all, is Russia's conduct is hostile and it's escalatory. Iran is not merely a Russian proxy. The U.S. is confronting a multi-adversary ecosystem right now, not a single tidy battlefield. You've got a lot of Iranian proxies that we're managing with others, yes, but in addition, we have a global trade constriction, and not even going to go into it tonight, but if the Houthi rebels decide they want to cause some problems with the Red Sea, that's going to affect another major shipping lane. So this is not just Iran. This is a whole host of others. Is what Russia is doing a de facto proxy war with the U.S.? Partially, but not fully. Let's call it a hybrid proxy environment. The war that's taking place is not, Russia versus America using Iran as a puppet. It's not how it goes. Iran has its own objectives. We've talked about them. They want to survive. Regime survival is absolutely number one on their list, and that's how they get victory. Deterrence restoration so that people take them seriously. Coercion of fellow Gulf states. And, of course, retaliation against the U.S. and Israel. They want to keep their missiles. They want to keep their nukes, but they also want to keep their proxy architecture. What makes it de facto proxy-like is that Moscow can support Tehran just enough to impose friction on the U.S., all while staying under the threshold of direct confrontation. So if Russia is feeding intelligence that helps Iranian targeting, it's not symbolic. It's participation by any other means. And I think they should be held accountable. But without any large-scale arms resupply or air defense coverage, without any Russians directly deploying or a formal security guarantee between the two countries, all of this remains indirect intervention. It's not full proxy management. And that's the ugly truth. I think the modern version of proxy war is not we arm you and you deny it. It's we share data, we share technology, sanctions evasions. I'll give you some diplomatic cover and I'll give you a narrative warfare, all while pretending to be a mediator. The very fact that Russia came out publicly and condemned the United States for actions against Iran is fucking laughable. Russia and China both appear to prefer that model, the modern version of proxy. So I wanted to decide, and I don't know if I have an answer truly, but can Iran succeed without a benefactor? If Iran did not have a lot of the intelligence that Russia is currently providing them, would they succeed? Would they be as effective? Will the regime survive without somebody in their corner? I think that they probably can't. Not in the old traditional sense, without a major benefactor. I don't think it can win. It might be able to survive, though. It's definitely possible to make it very, very expensive for the United States and avoid collapse without a benefactor. But it needs one. And I think that means that we all need to stop thinking in terms of victory and start thinking in terms of regime success criteria. We're going to do a complete deep dive on this here towards the end of the show, but Tehran's definition of success is much lower and much colder than what we think. Iran doesn't really need a patron underwriting its full war budget if it can keep enough oil moving, enough sanctions evasions alive, and enough import channels open to feed the war machine. EIA data is currently showing that China is deeply relevant here. Russia was 20% of China's crude imports in 2024. Iran was 11%, and roughly 90% of China's crude imports from Iran went to independent refineries. So that's not a military alliance, but it is a financial lifeline. Russia will not be the benefactor that Iran hopes for because Moscow, they're not in the charity business. They're in the opportunistic business. And Putin's always made that very, very clear. That's why they do not have formal security agreements. They have handshakes with a signature at the bottom. Reuters is really reporting some blunt stuff that Russia and China, they see the benefits in the conflict, but they've stopped short of direct intervention. Neither one of them want to get tied down. Moscow's currently tied down in Ukraine. It wants higher oil prices so that we lift sanctions. It worked. It wants our U.S. bandwidth diverted. It works. Doesn't want to rupture ties with the Gulf states or get into a direct fight with the U.S. Reuters quoted analysts and sources describing exactly that cold calculation. The Kremlin's own line reinforces it. It condemns the strikes, calls for restraint, and said Iran had not asked for arms. That's not the language of a state preparing to stake itself on Tehran's survival, but it is the language of a state trying to keep optionality. Here's the truth. I think that Russia wants Iran alive enough to be useful, damaged enough to be dependent, and weak enough not to become expensive. I think that this axis of Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea, they don't want or need a NATO-style treaty to act in mutually reinforcing ways. That linkage, I think it's very transactional, but it doesn't mean that it's any less dangerous. I think, honestly, secondly, Iran's center of gravity, it's not outside benefactors. It's domestic regime resilience. It's missile and drone capacity, as we've seen. It's regional reach, economic leakage through a lot of these sanction enforcement gaps. So I don't think, cutting one artery is enough. I think you got to do more. Both the Treasury Department and the State Department have been going after a lot of Iran's procurement and evasion networks precisely for that reason. I think if Russian intelligence support is real, if it is sustained, the U.S. response becomes a little more complicated than hit Iran harder. Now Washington has to decide, do we punish Iran only or also impose more visible costs on Russia, like their intelligence nodes, their facilitators, how they're evading sanctions from Ukraine, a lot of their intermediaries. What about cyber? What about third country conduits? We've talked about how a lot of weapons are smuggled in that way. Otherwise, the United States, it's fighting the trigger puller while ignoring the spotter, if the analogy works. I think that Iran's real external benefactor, it's not Moscow. It's probably the structure of the market, especially Chinese demand for Iranian oil. A lot of this smuggled infrastructure, transshipment, this global risk aversion. You got to follow the money. And I think that data on Chinese import mix makes it very clear why Tehran's economic endurance doesn't depend on Russian aid. Not alone anyways. There's a couple more reasons. But I think overarching, my point is at least not any less clear, but slightly less ambiguous, which is a contradictory statement, I appreciate, but let me explain. I don't know if I've answered the question in my own mind. Is Iran capable of winning without a benefactor? And as I've said, I think we need to restructure our definition of what winning means. And when we do that, we come up with the answer that, yes, Iran probably is perfectly capable of winning without a benefactor, but they have one. They have one with Putin. And I think Russia is going to help just enough to bleed America and protect its own interests, but they're not going to save Iran at any cost. And that's, I think, the harsh geometry of this entire war. Everybody is extraordinarily self-interested. It's, I don't know, alliance, but it's not exploitation. It's not rescue. It's calibration. And Iran is just, they're not looking for victory. They're looking to exhaust us. The most explosive claim, which is Russian sharing of targeting intelligence on the U.S. assets, it's been reported by a lot of credible outlets and major news coverage, but officially on both sides of the ocean, it's officially disputed. There's nothing in the White House or the Kremlin that says, yep, we're accusing, and nope, we're denying. A lot of the stuff, as I have been reporting, it's fast moving. So facts can change day by day. The success that I think goes into what Iran, the data that goes into what Iran's success model looks like, it is inferred. It's a lot of observed behavior. It's not a declared official war aim. So I don't know for certain that Iran's goals for victory are what I have stated, but I think it's pretty strong inference. Okay, so I think let's just roll right into the next topic quite logically, which is we recently removed oil sanctions from Russia because oil prices were going crazy. And in order to manage those, we wanted some of the oil that was stuck in the pipeline to be sold, allowing Russia to get rid of some of it, helping to bring the oil prices down. But I wouldn't have gone for it. I mean, I personally wouldn't have gone for it. So yes, I am offering an opinion. So I'm going to squeak my opinion in here, and we're going to roll into this story about U.S. broadly removing oil sanctions on Russia. I wouldn't have done it. I think that if I was the commander in chief, I would have stood in front of the American people, held a press conference, and basically said, look, I think everybody's aware of what we're currently doing over in the Middle East. There is a declared end state for that. And until that end state is reached, there is going to be a lot of volatility in the market. Now, to alleviate some of that volatility, I have agreed to relinquish, I don't know how many millions of barrels from the strategic oil reserve into the market, help keep the prices down. That's going to calm a lot of people, especially as we have midterms coming up. But that is not what you did. The administration instead, and it's metered, and we'll talk about it, they did allow Russia to sell some oil. Zelensky's pretty upset about it, and I can absolutely understand why. I think it was a shitty move. You gave Russia a couple of $1 billion. If they're not going to start a charity, they're going to buy weapons. But this is a nuanced subject. It is not just cut and dry. Oh, oil sanctions are lifted. It's a little targeted than that. It's a targeted easing. We'll look at the timeline. March 5th, OFAC issued a General License 133, which is a 30-day waiver for the delivery and sale of Russian origin crude already on vessels as of March 5th, specifically to India. Helps out India vis-a-vis our relationship with India. Lowers oil prices globally. Yes, Russia gets some cash. March 5th, OFAC issued General Order License 129 Alpha, which allowed transactions involving Deutschland and RN Refining and Marketing. Reuters reported that this exemption no longer has the prior expiration pressure Berlin had been dealing with. March 12th, OFAC issued General License 134, authorizing transactions ordinarily necessary for the sale, delivery, or offloading of Russian crude and petroleum products that were loaded on vessels on or before March 12th, all the way through April 11th. So this is limited to cargoes that were already loaded. It's not a blanket reopening of Russian oil commerce, but I'm not happy about it. I said my opinion was done, so I'm going to keep it out of it. Washington is also carving out temporary operational relief for Russian oil that's already in the pipeline, mainly to manage an oil shock tied to the Iran war and the broader Middle East supply disruption. It's money. So this is strategically significant because senior U.S. officials are now signaling this may not stop at a narrow waiver. Reuters is reporting that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the U.S. could remove sanctions for more Russian oil beyond this initial waiver for this very narrow window. So right now, the U.S. is prioritizing short-term market stability over maximum Russian pressure. It weakens the political coherence of the anti-Russian sanctions front. Ukraine and multiple European leaders have already hit this publicly. Associated Press said Zelensky, he went high and to the right, and he should have. The waiver is going to provide Russia with roughly $10 billion. It's going to strengthen Russia's war effort, while Germany's chancellor called the move the wrong signal. Reuters separately reported the European Commission urged the United States to enforce the G7 price cap after Washington's waiver announcement. So this is telling India, Japan, and other importers that our sanction, it's negotiable. Because when energy panic hits, we're going to give you a waiver. India's already been given a country-specific waiver on March 5th. Reuters reported Japan is considering whether to buy Russian crude oil after what we did. Because once one buyer learns Washington is going to bend, what deterrence do you have? Sanctions no longer are a wall, they're a bargaining instrument. And this gives Moscow the strategic breathing room, even if the commercial impact is absolutely limited. And it is, I admit it. But there's two layers here. Look at it commercially. The immediate effect is modest because much of the oil was already headed to Asian buyers. So we're not going to see a lot of this at home. But politically, the signal is huge. Russia now sees that external shocks everywhere is a way that you can fracture sanctions enforcement. And it forces Moscow's confidence that as long as you wait long enough and the environment is rocky enough, it'll work in your favor and the U.S. will capitulate. This absolutely exposes this ridiculous hierarchy in U.S. priorities because it shows that when we're forced to choose between absolute pressure on Russia and containing oil shock, Iranian war-related oil shock, that we're going to choose the former over the latter. I get that this protects domestic consumers, but I seriously think there's another way to do this. While sanctions remain in place and we don't lose face and you don't worry about your midterms. I mean, all that the administration is doing is showing that domestic fuel prices are going to be able to override sanctions. There's a lot of story here. I don't want to overread this into U.S.-Russia relationship normalization because it's not. The broader sanctions are still holding. The White House's own February action reaffirmed the 2022 prohibition on imports into the United States of Russian crude oil, petroleum products. So we're not doing that. AP is also saying that French President Macron stressed that these sanctions remain in place despite the temporary waiver. This is not a wholesale sanctions rollback. It is a meaningful tactical relaxation. I don't like it, but it is a possible precursor to a much broader easing if this doesn't get better soon. This is a huge credibility hit to the United States, I think, and to the other Western countries that went into this with us against Russia. We all collectively agreed that what Russia was doing to their neighbor was bad. And this was a method to signal that. It's analogous to you tell your child that they don't get dessert because they haven't finished their dinner. And as you all know, you can't have any pudding if you don't eat your meat. And now they're giving them pudding, but they didn't eat their meat. I'm very upset about this. I think what's uncertain in this topic is whether these waivers are going to remain very narrow emergency measures, or is this the first step to unwinding sanctions against Russia? Because, well, what's the next thing that's going to take an economic constriction? I told you, if the Red Sea shuts down, you're going to see a lot more than just oil go up in price. And, I'd also like to say that petroleum byproducts are responsible for so much more than the gas that we put into our cars. They're responsible for fertilizer. I didn't know that. I actually had to look this up. There are byproducts of refining that are used in hundreds and hundreds of products. Oil is used as a coating in fertilizer. Fertilizer is used to grow crops. We eat those crops. It is food. So it's not just gas. It's medicine. It's pharmaceuticals. It's plastics. It's groceries. It's a lot. It's a lot. I think that if what we were trying to do was sanction Russia to the point of exhaustion, it was working. It's a long gamble, but it was working. Zelensky explicitly said this is not the right decision, even if the $10 billion that he said Russia would glean from this is arguable. He says that the commercial effect is huge. The strategic point is huge. Sanctions relief on oil improves Russia's cash flow. At a minimum, it reduces some of the stress on it. And I think that matters because Russia is fighting a massive war of attrition where money pays for munitions, logistics, and it's going to have a second and third order effect. I think that a lot of our deterrence and sanctions credibility is damaged here. I think that a lot of our adversaries are going to see that when the chips are down, that the United States is not going to take the pain. I think that if this had been done correctly and unpacked to the American people, I think we would have gotten behind it. We would have taken the pain. Reuters reported that the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said U.S. oil could lift sanctions. Said the U.S. would lift sanctions on more Russian oil that is bigger than one waiver. And it tells Moscow that external crisis can fracture our discipline. So I also think, lastly, and then we'll move on from the story, is that this seriously strains Ukraine's coalition. If Europeans and Ukrainians are not reading this as a technical shipping adjustment, they are reading it as a mixed signaling. Reuters is reporting that Europeans are angry. AP is reporting that Zelensky has publicly criticized it. And a lot of the coalition that we have right now is important. And I think that this unravels a lot of it. So I'll continue to look at this. If it has any changes or any other developments, we'll circle back to it. But as of right now, it is supposedly limited in scope. It has a timeline associated with it. But yeah, it is. I guess to bookend this, this is not a complete rollback of sanctions. It is targeted, but there's a huge amount of blowback. I can't even imagine what the Ukrainians, who are making some pretty serious gains in in Ukraine right now against the Russians, must be thinking. I think that the immediate effect on the Ukrainian war is probably indirect. This is not decisive. This is not going to, suddenly hand Russia a breakthrough in the Donbass. I think it's actually a little more insidious than that. I think it marginally improves Russia's fiscal resilience, but more importantly, it signals that sanction regimes have limits. I do. Yeah. All right. I, again, apologize for my voice this evening. I'm really trying to nurse this cold. I also wanted to talk this evening about some of the lone wolf attacks that have taken place. I have had a lot of people reach out to me privately and ask me what my opinion was on the likelihood of a coordinated terrorist attack directed, funded, or, incepted from Iran. I don't think it's possible. I think it's highly unlikely. I was going to kind of walk through some of the things that led me to that conclusion, just so that I can bring everyone along together, and maybe you'll form a different opinion. The intelligence that is being released is all open source. I did not glean any of my information from anything that was compartmentalized, that wasn't supposed to be publicly released, but I did look at sources within the Department of Justice, DHS, and a couple of others that said, sorry, just checking my notes here, that the most likely threat inside the United States right now is not a centrally coordinated mass casualty event like 9/11 or something 9/11-ish. It's probably more likely a mix of a lot of targeted plots against specific individuals or symbolic sites. And we've seen some of these. We've seen synagogues and some other lone wolf attacks. I would also expect cyber disruption against a lot of the U.S. infrastructure. There's a lot of U.S. infrastructure that is susceptible. Our energy grid specifically is horrible, and it's patchworked, and it's very susceptible. A lot of the lone actors, we've seen some of that already. These self-radicalized individuals that get triggered by duty or perceived duty or propaganda, you're going to see that. Small cell or surrogate activity, possibly using criminals or proxies or facilitators, rather than a clean, overt, command and control Iranian Republican Guard Corps operation on U.S. soil. So I don't want people conflating Iran has intent and networks with Iran is about to execute a coordinated homeland campaign. They're not the same thing. As I mentioned, the public sources that I have looked at support the first. It does not currently prove the second. Reuters reported that a DHS intel assessment, this is a little while ago, said a large-scale physical attack was unlikely. Even at the same time, while warning that Iran and its proxies probably pose a persistent threat of targeted attacks in the homeland would likely escalate if there were calls to action. The FBI does a really good job on screening for this, like really good. And there's a couple of other domestic organizations that do it really well. So lone wolf coordinated is. I think for years, the government has assessed that Iran maintains these surrogate networks inside the United States. The ODNI, Director of National Intelligence report, says that Iran will probably continue to directly threaten the U.S. globally. So it's not just here, it's all U.S. forces anywhere. And they are always and have been committed to this decades-long effort to develop networks inside the United States. So the correct read is high intent, non-trivial capability, but there is very limited evidence of an imminent, centrally directed mass attack. Probably more likely there is going to be a, messy, deniable, lower signature violence, some kind of cyber attack. What do I think points towards a coordinated Iranian attack? If I had to look at the markers, there is a real precedent for Iranian-directed plotting in the United States, according to the Department of Justice. They just had case law to prove this. Earlier this month, DOJ announced the conviction of an Iranian intelligence agent that was tied to a foiled murder for hire, where the individual discussed victims being targeted here in the United States, sought help for it, needed help for getting some equipment and the target was a political person. I don't want to say who the political person was because the Secret Service gets real fucking twitchy when you say stuff like that in the public space, but I think we all know who it was. There was a long-running effort to murder an Iranian-American journalist, Mashish, out of New York. In January, the Department of Justice said plainly that the Iranian government has engaged in a campaign of assassination plots in the United States and abroad, targeting opponents of the regime. But they've been doing this for, decades, right? This matters, though, because it destroys this comforting fiction that, Iran would never risk U.S. soil operations. It already has. But the pattern is very selective and deniable. It's not going to be this 9/11 style synchronized homeland assault. So if I was to indicate what points for it, that would be that. What points away from a broad coordinated attack, there's points for that one too. For me, the biggest is the DHS assessment that Reuters commented on back in March 2nd, where it was quoted as saying, large-scale physical attacks are unlikely, targeted attacks and cyber retaliation are most likely. What's also important is a widely circulated alert about a possible Iran drone attack. Remember this? From a vessel off California? Yeah, that didn't happen. It was described as by the White House, as reported by Reuters, as it was an unverified single tip. And single source reporting, you don't base intelligence off of unless it's really vetted. So that does not mean that there isn't a risk. It just means that a lot of the public fear is being inflated by weak reporting and rumor. The strategic point most people seem to miss is that Iran really prefers options with deniability, a lot of proportionality control, and asymmetry. They don't want a spectacular, centrally coordinated mass attack inside the United States, because if you think that we would rally around the flag if something like that happened, you're absolutely correct. 9/11, classic example. We overthrew an entire country based off that one. We would shit stomp Iran if they were to do something. And a lot of times they don't want that. They want survival. They want regime. And it makes it a much lower probability choice unless Tehran concludes it has nothing left to lose. The public record right now does not show that threshold, though. That inference is very consistent with DHS assessments, long-running patterns of Iranian activity described by both the Department of Justice and the ODNI. Okay. So why then lone actor or inspired attacks? Why are they the biggest near-term concern? Okay. Reuters has reported yesterday that the United States law enforcement is on heightened alert countrywide. But we had a recent attack in Michigan, and we had a recent attack in Virginia, and that highlights the limits of prevention. Investigators are viewing these incidents as self-radicalized, not externally coordinated. That is what I think your most likely vector is going to be. Lone wolf, self-radicalized. But these are also the hardest to preempt because there's much less communications that they can monitor and ping on. There's less organizational scaffolding. They're not asking for things from people. They're not holding meetings. There's no t-shirts. And this matches the broader pattern of a lot of modern homeland security failure points. We have a hard time preventing low-tech, fast-moving, grievance-fueled violence against soft targets, churches, schools, synagogues. It'll beat bureaucracy more often than sophisticated foreign commanded plots do, right? This is uglier, it's less cinematic, but it's much more probable. Reuters reported on the 2nd of March that investigators were examining whether the Austin bar shooting had any connection to the war, but it was too early to say. This is a pattern of violence, ambiguity, potentially inspired violence, but it's not clearly directed Iranian command and control. Cyber is the most active and most likely for me. I think, and I'm not alone, the Associated Press reports that Iran-linked hackers are already pushing and stretching operations into the United States, while activity against, there was a U.S. medical device company that was hit, elevated concern for defense contractors, hospitals, ports, water plants, basically anything that has infrastructure and is connected to the web. So power stations and railways are included in that too. Iran's good at this, and they've already demonstrated intent, creativity in cyber operations. Now, we have a robust defense, but they only have to be right once. This gives a very cheap and deniable and scalable lever to Iran and politically below the threshold of overt war, right? If you're looking for coordinated attack in the broad sense, cyber, that's where coordination is most plausible. And it's most useful to Iran right now. So that's my assessment based on the current open source and some official material. Lone actor, inspired attacks against, I would probably say Jewish, Israeli linked, dissident, government adjacent, or otherwise symbolic targets in the U.S., right? Cyber disruptions against infrastructure and defense adjacent firms, wherever they can get in. There's a lot of vulnerability there. Probably also look for some targeted assassinations, possibly using criminals, maybe intimidation plots. So that would be the most likely if I was to assess. Possible, but much less likely in the near term would be these small coordinated cells conducting pattern of life, surveillance, maybe some sabotage, arson, again, on symbolic targets. Iran's surrogate network, it makes it plausible. They have it, they can do it, but there's no public evidence of a broad campaign. And least likely, based off everything that I can find, is this worst case scenario, this centrally directed, synchronized, multiple site Iranian kinetic attack across the United States homeland. It's just that kind of coordination, that kind of planning, that kind of rehearsal. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. And there are a lot of observers looking for this exact kind of coordination. So I don't think it's going to happen. DHS doesn't. They explicitly cut against that scenario by calling large-scale physical attack very unlikely. And I agree. The evidence does not support an imminent, centrally coordinated mass-cal Iranian attack inside the U.S. There's no proof that recent U.S. incidents that took place were even directed by Tehran. There's no proof that sleeper cells are about to be activated at any kind of national scale. I think that strategically, Iran's best play here, it's not a movie script style attack. It's intimidate, it's raise security costs, it's raise fear, exploit some of these symbolic targets, cyber friction. That is the most likely. It's cheaper, it's more deniable. And looking at Iran's record over the past 25 plus years, this aligns with the record. But don't think that it's either no threat at all or imminent sleeper cell war. That's a little too binary. You have to look at, there's a real Iranian threat inside the United States. It's probably most credibly expressed through plots, targeted plots, cyber, and inspired violence. There's a lot of people that live in the United States under this wonderful constitution that we have that are going to take advantage of our laws for their own exploitation. We grant First Amendment rights. They have a lot of opportunities to take advantage of that because we let them. And I mean, that's just kind of the price of it sometimes. So I suppose a broad attack in theory is possible, but there's no evidence whatsoever in the public. All right. Just understand that a lot of the sensitive intelligence on Iranian networks and counterterrorism, they're not public. And I've told you many times, and I've been very honest about it, I'm not going to disclose anything in this forum that is not supposed to be disclosed. So regardless of what I may have have information access to, open source picture is as good as it gets on this one. This threat profile can also change extremely quickly if Tehran's leadership concludes that the game is up, that their survival is at stake. They may do a Hail Mary pass. Public attribution around a lot of these lone actors, it's also very murky in the early stages of the investigation. It's why I don't like to rush to judgment. A lot of the recent incidents are under investigation. So it's a little premature to say what exactly their affiliation was. until it all comes to court. Okay. So last, but certainly not least, is almost immediately when we struck Iran, I was questioning, well, what are the objectives? And I've expressed that on the show because victory is important, but more important than victory is understanding the conditions that lead to victory, right? I've said this before. It is not an aircraft carrier with a victory banner on the side of it. There's a little more to it than that. It has to be tangible. It has to be quantifiable. It has to be actionable. So I really wanted to understand what victory looked like for the United States, but also what does failure look like to the United States? What does victory look like to Iran? What does failure look like to Iran? Because if we can understand that, then as ugly and messy as this current conflict is, at least we have a roadmap to guide us towards the end destination. Unless, of course, you keep moving the goalpost, but let's assume for the moment that situations on the ground are stuck, and we'll base our assessment off of that. We have launched an assload of strikes against Iran. Iran has launched some against us as well. Iranian targeting, a lot of U.S. confirmed strikes, comparative campaign logic between the two of us, and realistic victory conditions. That the U.S. is looking at this at symmetrical. It is not. The United States and Israel are prosecuting a very high volume, precision degradation campaign against the Iranian military. Iran, on the other hand, is prosecuting a lower volume, higher disruption coercion campaign, which is really just aimed at political pain, a lot of economic shock, as we've talked about, and massive regional instability. And they're winning. They're winning on that front, right? So we're fighting kind of two different wars. And the comparison between the two is really stark in execution. Look at the numbers. The United States. Open source reporting says almost 1,100 publicly acknowledged military targets, or aim points as they're calling them, at minimum. 1,000 of those in the opening phase, 90 plus on Karg Island. Now, Iran confirmed successful targets hit, dozens. Not hundreds, dozens. Best estimate, roughly 32 to 38 physical targets Iran has hit when you combine land sites and ships. So 16 of those are vessels struck, roughly 16 to 22 distinct land targets. That's a huge disparity. So the U.S. is winning the military exchange by volume. No doubt about it. We're winning on precision. We're winning on target class. Iran is trying to win the political and economic exchange by making the entire region harder to ensure, harder to defend, and absolutely harder to stabilize. So really, this means the side destroying more targets, the U.S. in this case, is not automatically the side controlling the strategic narrative. Iranian target patterns. Let's look at what they have struck. Let's look at what they are targeting. Their attack geography has broadened much more than just Israel. Their current target set includes Israeli urban and population centers. You've got U.S. diplomatic and military infrastructure. Recently, they've been hitting Gulf energy and logistics infrastructure. Commercial shipping in and around the Hormuz. A couple of vessels ahead. Possible peripheral spillover targets. But you want to look at it country by country. In Israel, you've had Tel Aviv area. You've had Tikva, Jerusalem, Beit Shemesh. There's been a couple of other central Israeli impact zones as well, but, that's the gist of it. In Iraq, you've had the Baghdad Diplomatic Support Center. Oh, yes. And the United States Embassy compound in Baghdad, which is the largest embassy that the United States has anywhere on the planet. It is massive compound. It was hit. In Qatar, you had I hate saying this one. Is it Al Udeid? Yeah. In the their air base was hit there in Qatar. In Bahrain, they say that the 5th Fleet headquarters was hit. I've read reports that it was a warehouse adjacent to the 5th Fleet. I'm not entirely sure. It was aimed at. There was an impact. There you go. You also had some associated facilities in Bahrain in the Manama Jufar area. In United Arab Emirates, you had Abu Dhabi, you had Jabal Ali in Dubai, you had Fujari. I'm going to have somebody else come on and say these names for me, or I'm just going to hit a button and have somebody with a really nice accent say them. Ruwas, maritime, you were looking at 16 civilian and commercial vessels that have been struck or damaged in the Gulf in the Hormuz theater. There are a couple of places that are contested or less firm on the reporting. Azerbaijan-related incidents, for example, they're kind of disputed whether Iranian strikes were responsible or not. But the best estimates of Iranian successful hits: land sites hit or damaged 16 to 22, ships struck at least 16 plus, with a combined physical target of 32 to 38. Now, this is not a precision air campaign on behalf of Iran. It is a distributed disruption campaign. Now, let's compare that to the U.S. confirmed strike patterns. Our campaign is operating at campaign scale. This isn't symbolic retaliation as it is with the Iranians. Public reporting indicates at least 1,000 plus targets in the opening phase of Operation Epic Fury. As I mentioned before, 90 or more military targets on Karg Island alone. The categories of things that the United States is striking is exactly what you would expect a large campaign to hit. We targeted command and control centers. We targeted missile infrastructure, drone infrastructure, naval assets. They're almost gone. Air defenses. We have total air superiority over that country. Security architecture. It's a little amorphous, but target package nonetheless. A lot of intelligence and operational nodes. So if you do a comparative assessment between Iran and the United States, Iran had fewer successful strikes with a higher focus on civilian disruption, diplomatic pressure, energy choke points, shipping, shock, it worked, and regional anxiety. So they got a lot out of a little, if you think about it. A lot of far-reaching effects for what they attacked. The United States, on the other hand, massive strike volume. Like I said, 1,100. Higher focus on military infrastructure, force projection capability, command architecture. A lot of Iran's future offensive capacity, so factories or anything that could potentially make ordnance, we hit. A lot of deterrence restoration. So if you look at Iran and the United States, two different goals, two different capability sets, and it's a contest. It's a contest between precision destruction on the U.S. and the Israeli side and distributed coercion on the Iranian side. Iran is not trying to match American volume because it can't. It is trying to make fewer hits matter more. I think they're working. The Strait of Hormuz is more or less paralyzed. A lot of our Gulf allies are questioning this alliance. A lot of our European allies are keeping us at an arm's distance. So what is each side trying to do? What is Iran's strategy? Very, very simple. Their campaign logic is not conquest. It is cost imposition, pure and simple. They are trying to prove that Israel cannot fully shield its urban centers with their dome, their Iron Dome. U.S. regional bases and diplomatic footprints are vulnerable. The Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf energy corridors can be destabilized, and we predicted that one a while back, long before the attack took place. The coalition cannot attack Iran without paying in oil, without paying in shipping insurance and alliance stress. Iran is fighting horizontally in many ways. Ports, ships, refineries, diplomatic sites, exposed regional infrastructure. This is how a conventionally weaker actor stays relevant. The U.S. strategy, on the other hand, is a degradation campaign. You destroy Iran militarily, their capacity, reduce Iran's missiles and their drones. And that may not be an attrit. It could be their capability. It could be the launch sites. It could be the command and control. It could be the targeting. Doesn't necessarily mean the specific missile or the specific drone. Cripple its ability to project force regionally. So whether that's directly or with their proxies. Of course, protect the United States bases in the area and our partners. Keep the Strait of Hormuz open enough to avoid strategic economic blowback. So contrast to the Iranians, the U.S. is fighting vertically. We're hitting command, we're hitting control, missile forces, naval forces, air defenses, a lot of regime coercive instruments tied to warfighting. So senior leaders, decision makers. Now, Israel has a say in this too. So their strategy, it's different. It overlaps with Washington's, but it is not identical. They're very different in the way that they look at a problem set than the way that the United States does. Now, Iran is on their doorstep, so that's probably part and parcel as to why, but the Israelis are also, they're kind of bastards. They just are. They really are trying to push back Iran's direct threat envelope. They want to degrade their missile and their drone, and their air defense infrastructure. They want to make it so that Iran has no future strike capacity against Israel forever, and potentially create pressure for internal regime weakening. I don't see that happening. Israel would take regime destabilization if they can get it, but I think even the United States quickly changed, as a regime change, a stated goal and more of a we would like to have. The realistic measurable aim for Israel is really long-term threat suppression, not this fantasy collapse narrative. Okay, so that's what we've done up until now, and that is what the strategy of Iran is, what the United States is, and what Israel is. At least stated. I didn't call the Ayatollah of Iran and ask, so I'm inferring on that one, but that seems to be likely. So with that being said, what does victory look like for the United States? We'll look at this in two different ways. We'll look at what does minimal viable victory look like, and what is maximal, and then what does failure look like? I would say minimal viable victory is Iran can no longer seriously threaten the United States' regional positions in the near term. The Strait of Hormuz is open. Their missile, their drone, and their naval architecture is, if not gone, let's say badly degraded. And then Washington exits without needing to occupy, or this endless escalation ladder that we seem to be in right now. What does maximal victory look like? Okay. Iran accepts unconditional surrender and defeat. That's it. They lose the ability to regenerate that threat in the near future. No missiles, no nukes, and U.S. deterrence is restored across the region. That would be maximal. Okay, what does failure look like for the United States? Well, we're currently looking at it. I'm not saying we failed. I'm saying that if something doesn't change, we're on the glide path to it. Endless strike cycle. Oil shock persists. Allies hedge. Iran survives, possibly adapts, and keeps imposing shipping and energy pain. In that scenario, the U.S. wins tactically, but we inherit a permanent policing burden. Okay, let's shift over to Israel. What does Israel's minimal viable victory look like? For them, it would be Iran's direct strategic threat to Israel is substantially reduced, especially when it comes to these hypersonic missiles, if they are in fact fieldable. Missile and drone capacity are pushed back for years. I don't see that one happening, but okay. Possibly if you destroy enough of the manufacturing and technology. Israel restores deterrence. Okay, that's minimal. What does maximal look like? Iran's regime is weakened badly enough that it will never rebuild the threat architecture that it currently has at any kind of scale. You permanently knock them back to the Stone Age, so to speak. Failure, what does failure look like for Israel? I would say Iran remains politically intact. You delay the threat, you don't solve it. Israel wins several battles and buys really only temporary security. What does Iranian victory look like? This is the easiest one for me, quite frankly, because it's the easiest political definition of victory. Looking at minimal conditions for Iran to survive, or I should say claim victory, would be regime survival, and they're currently in it. They have a new Ayatollah. No surrender. They've already said they're not going to. They maintain enough retaliatory capacity that they have some deterrence. And the coalition pays visible costs in shipping, energy, diplomacy, and public fear. I mean, I think we're there. Maximal victory on behalf of Iran would be U.S.-Israel are pushed toward a ceasefire on terms not amounting to an Iranian humiliation. And Iran emerges bloodied, unbroken, and claiming strategic endurance. What is failure like for Iran? Well, the regime would survive, but lose most meaningful deterrent capacity, a puppet government in every respect. Their navy gone, their missiles gone, and no regional coercive tools are left. Proxies are abandoned. Hormuz is held against them, and they become scrutinized for it. In this scenario, Tehran lives, but they are strategically declawed. So there you go. That is the three big players in this conflict right now. What does success look like? What does failure look like? And you can decide where we are on that roadmap. Here's the hard truth, though. The U.S. and Israel need durable effects to claim victory. Iran, well, they just need to survive. This is an asymmetric fight. It means that Israel and the U.S. need to prove lasting military and deterrent outcomes. No nukes, no missiles, no mines, no ability to shape commerce to impact global markets. Iran, on the other hand, only needs to avoid collapse, avoid surrender, and keep enough of the bite to say that the assault failed and that they're still there. And then they can use this as propaganda fuel for the next 100 years. So while Iran is losing the attritional military exchange, and there was no doubt that that was going to go down that way, it still is a very plausible path to political narrative survival. This is the trap in wars like this one. One side can win the battlefield. Meanwhile, the other side remains alive enough to deny strategic closure. So what do I think the most likely end state of this is? I think the most likely end state is not total victory by anyone. I think it is going to end in an unstable, very coerced middle ground. I would say the most probable post-war is the United States will claim that Iran's offensive capacity was shattered, especially when it's this administration in front of the microphone, claims that deterrence has been restored, claims that freedom of navigation was defended. For Israel, they're going to claim long-range Iranian threat was pushed back, that a operational initiative was regained. They're going to claim that the strategic warning was delivered, basically sending a message to Iran that you fuck around and find out. Iran is going to claim that they survived, that it resisted a United States and Israel combined pressure campaign, claims it imposed unacceptable regional costs, which they're there, and it didn't surrender. That's the likely political finish, because the maximal ambitions of all sides, as I outlined, are way too high. They are. Yeah, wow. There's a lot of implications to this. And the near-term implications of what's currently taking place in the Gulf is more pressure on Gulf energy. All of these nodes are going to feel it. The producers, the refiners, the shippers. Speaking of shippers, you're going to have continued maritime disruption, high cost of insurance. A lot of underwriters are going to make it so expensive that no one can afford to do it, to ship anyways. You're going to have a huge burden on missile and drone defense moving forward. And this is the future. As we've seen in Ukraine, it's now being demonstrated on another battlefield. Persistent vulnerability of a lot of U.S. infrastructure regionally, domestically. The strategic implications of this are huge. The U.S. military superiority, it's obvious, right? But don't discount Iranian capacity for regional disruption. This is very dangerous, despite the fact that we outmatch them. So I think victory is going to be judged less by body count and more by endurance, and deterrence and economic consequences. And that sliding scale is going to continue to slide until somebody just calls uncle. This side can lose more targets and still avoid strategic defeat if it survives and keep imposing costs. The U.S. is destroying far more targets. Israel is seeking long-term threat reduction. Iran is trying to survive, punish, and outlast. And that means that this battlefield scoreboard and the strategic scoreboard are related, but they are not identical. I think that the real contest in this fight is, can the United States and Israel convert overwhelming strike superiority into some kind of strategic, durable effect? That's unknown. Can Iran survive long enough and impose enough economic and regional pain to deny them a clean win? I don't know. But that is absolutely their center of gravity. Don't have a crystal ball. All I can do is look at the inputs and try to give some outputs. That is my input-output math for this evening. A couple of things I want everyone to keep in mind is that Iranian target counts are approximate. They're not giving raw data in the same way that we give raw data. They often conflate things. They attribute damage to debris damage, and they don't have battle damage assessment capability the way we do. So there's really no way to back it up. Okay. Our targeting numbers are often referring to aim points, sites, in an overarching campaign. It's not perfectly comparable to counting Iranian physical hits. My assessment of what victory here is completely an analytic construct. This is not any formal declared end state by the administration or by anyone in Israel or Iran. This is a very fast-moving war one major event around the Strait of Hormuz or Gulf infrastructure or leadership decapitation completely shifts the framework. So that's my assessment for March 15th. What victory looks like, what failure looks like, and then I'll leave it up to you to decide where we are on this path. I have an opinion, but I'm going to keep that one close to the vest for this evening. The other thing I'm going to keep close to my vest this evening is my bourbon-flavored tea, or is it tea-flavored bourbon? Because I seem to have run dry, which usually means we're at the end of our show for this evening. I hope you've enjoyed some of these thought experiments. I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, well, tune in next week. I hope that you will, and in the meantime, this is Brad Colbert, the Iceman, reminding everyone to stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.